And we'll get Zoom to balance the audio. Uh, Lindsay, in the previous two interviews, we've talked a number of times about how the debate or the national conversation around the administrative state evolved over time, and particularly picked up in 2012. But it seems like the period from 2023, 2024 was almost like a step change. Is that a fair way to look at it?
I think that's absolutely a fair way to look at it. In the database that I run at DC Inbox, you can see the attention grow very clearly in 2023, which is coincident with coming in of the 118th Congress.
Interesting. Who are some of the personalities that kind of led that step change?
So some of these people didn't come in the 118th, but they became more empowered in the new Republican majority. But you see people like Thomas Massie, who had been in Congress already, and what they did in the 118th Congress is in the Judiciary Committee, they've always had part of the Judiciary Committee have a subcommittee on things that deal with administrative law. But what they did is they changed the title of this subcommittee that it was going to be about the administrative state and some other things. And so this sort of phrasing got into the way that we talk about these things in terms of how we name our committees. And other people who helped that process along are people like Paul Gosar out of Arizona, Matt Gaetz out of Florida, and Madison Cawthorn, who was only in for a term. But there was this sort of idea that they were going to be people who were fighting against federal tyrants, is the words that they used. And so it kind of got a lot of fuel on that sort of idea once the new majority came in the 118th.
This reminds me of some of the work that we've done on energy transition narrative or energy narratives in general. There's a lot of effort put into by, for instance, in industry lobby groups or particularly, very large companies, that sort of thing, professional associations, on managing the narrative, making sure that their story gets told, and ideally, their story becomes the dominant story, the dominant narrative. And it sounds like that's exactly what's happening here, is these Republicans capture the narrative, reframe it, and suddenly now we see the administrative state become an evil bogeyman.
Yeah, so that's something where I would say it's not the Republican Party at large. It is a few sort of like policy space entrepreneurs who take talking points or who take sort of these notions, generally from other outside of Congress influencers, and then put that into the congressional lexicon and then continue repeating it so that you can't ignore it. And it does do the work of narrative creation. In the instances of like Matt Gaetz and Madison Cawthorn and Paul Gosar, a lot of the things that they're talking about in their official communications come from outside, from Steve Bannon, who had been on the inside because he did work for President Trump in the first administration. But his ideas only got louder, and they were able to amplify that volume by bringing in his ideas against the administrative state into the public discourse. And then it gets picked up by a number of other Republicans who are closer to them. But it's not the whole Republican Party, it's really sort of this upstart part of it.
That's very interesting. And what role did President Trump was very active in the 4 years that he wasn't in the administration, wasn't president. Um, what role did he play? Did he pick up the same kind of language, and did he promote that?
So I don't usually study how presidents receive these things. I'm very much an Article One Congress focused person, but I do know that in looking at his administration today, you can see through lines in a lot of the things that Steve Bannon had then said, Matt Gaetz would then say, and now current President Trump is saying. So it's possible that during that time he's also using this terminology that's just sort of outside the scope of my expertise.
Can we talk about Steve Bannon for a moment? Because I think he's emerged as, and maybe rightly so, but he's emerged as this Rasputin-like character. He's behind Trump. And we saw in the Trump 1.0, he was kind of banished for a while, and then he came back. And what role did he play in the, period 2021 to 2025 while Trump was not president?
Well, in that time, he's still running his podcast and YouTube show called The War Room, where he's interviewing different members of Congress, different other upstart Republican legislators, people who have something to say on the conservative enterprise generally. And so he's staying relevant by having a pulse into those conversations. And we're now sort of seeing a new resurgence in Steve Bannon in the United States because he's granting interviews where he's talking about how there's plans for a Donald Trump third term, and he's sort of laying the groundwork to be more relevant if he believes he can like curry favor by saying, ah, I've found a pathway for you to stay in power longer. So he is this sort of character that I would put him in what we call the extended party network. It's not the Republican Party proper, but it's sort of like all the other peripheral pieces that make up the constellation of the conservative thoughts that generally are leading conversation in the US right now.
And is there a change in the Republican Party under Trump? I mean, I've seen this argued many times, is that Trump, took over the Republican Party, and the Republican Party were the executives, the brass, the insiders, were happy to give it to him. And he reshaped it with the MAGA culture and so on, of which Bannon played a large role in the rise of. So is what's the Republican Party doing, in this time period?
So it in my read of it, it is not all of the Republican Party, but it is this more vocal parts of the Republican Party. And I think because we sort of understand that what it takes to govern is different than what it takes to politic, as soon as you have a president that's in office that shares your views, you maybe don't have to do as much of that governing rhetoric because you're not going to get vetoed. You can instead continue to politic. And so the voices, the narratives, the terminology that we hear tends to be from this like very vocal part of the Republican conference. And there are some that I would argue within the Republican conference really wish this could be done because they want to get back to what they consider business as normal. And they don't want to be fighting over things when they're just saying, like, who can be louder on Twitter or TikTok? And instead, they want to get to regular order. But those are mostly legacy or institutional Republicans who aren't really in control anymore. And some of this has to do with the downfall of Speaker McCarthy, which was led by an upstart eight Republicans in the House in the House, and then all the Democrats agreeing to move on that. So we've seen this change, and it is that the ones who are more vocal tend to be the ones that we focus on.
Lindsay, thank you very much for this. This is episode 3 of a multi-part series, and we'll look forward to episode 4. Thank you for your insights.
And thank you.